Warning: the following audio may contain coarse language, as well as discussion of material that may not be suitable for younger audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Also, we may spoil just about anything that pops into our heads. We hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of ZNote-Talku. Yeah, I know, a super creative name, but what do you want? That's just what I came up with. I am here today, joined by a good friend of mine who I met over Discord, fellow lover of baseball and anime, Mr. Flats.
Hello.
How about them Phillies?
I don't even want to get started with that.
Hey, at least trying to get a bullpen.
We need to keep on the focus for this episode.
The focus, as in we've been recording for 30 seconds. It's totally fine. But anyway, so for those of you who are joining us, today we are going to talk about the recently finished airing, Heike Monogatari, or the Heike Story, for those of you who prefer the English name. Just like before, this is going to be pretty loose and unstructured. We're just going to talk about what we want to talk about. We might get angry at each other, we might start complimenting each other's exquisite taste, but regardless, Flats, just general impressions on the show as a whole.
I mean, where do you even start with this show? I've always been a very big fan of Naoko Yamada, the director of the show, and I think once again she excelled at the product. This is her first show since leaving Kyoto Animation, and I had very high expectations for it because she has made some of my favorite shows of the last decade.
For those of you who don't know, she is the director brainchild behind Liz and the Bluebird and A Silent Voice. You know, two things that you might have heard of recently. I don't know.
As well as K-On! And generally one of the main people behind Hibike Euphonium.
Absolutely.
Very much a big modern figure at Kyoto Animation.
Most definitely. But as far as Heike Monogatari is concerned, she did not actually make this at KyoAni. It was announced about, I want to say, a month and a half or so before the show aired its first episode that she had basically left the studio to work on this at another studio.
Yeah. So she made this studio, or sorry, not she made the studio. She
could make a studio, and I would binge all of that. Yeah,
obviously. But she made this work with Science Saru, the studio that's most famous for the shows by Masaki Yuasa.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused a big stir among certain crowds at the time. People were kind of in shock, but overall, I think the show came incredibly well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It has a lot of her hallmarks, which I like. Very, very specific type of shooting style. She really likes to imitate kind of true to life types of filming and camera angles and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was really interesting to see her tackle, I would say, very different work from what I'm accustomed to seeing from her.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, yeah, this is. I mean, stuff like either Liz and the Bluebird or Hibike or. Correct me if I'm wrong. She also did Tamako Market and Tamako Love Story, didn't she?
She did, yeah.
Yeah.
Her main things that she usually does is high school dramas.
Yeah.
And so to go from that to doing
an epic historical drama, yeah.
An adaptation of a 12th century Japanese epic is just something else entirely. It kind of came out of left field.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that anybody would have anticipated that this would be a project that she took on, but at the same time, you can sort of understand why maybe she left to work on this, because can you imagine Kyoto Animation doing a show like this?
I couldn't really. I mean, knowing some of her proclivities with directors, it doesn't surprise me the most that she would do this.
Mm-hmm.
She likes very grand and slightly out there directors like Alejandro Jodorowsky, people like that. And so it's interesting to see her go a bit more out there than I'm used to from her.
Yeah.
And I'm to be honest excited to see what she'll do from here.
Yeah, if this was her first foray into non-KyoAni property, I am so looking forward to whatever the heck she makes next, along with Reiko Yoshida and Kensuke Ushio, who she also worked on with Silent Voice and Liz and the Bluebird, and especially Ushio, because his music in all of that stuff is absolutely phenomenal, and it's equally phenomenal here.
Yeah, I was not the biggest fan of Ushio within the first episode, but it really grew on me. I think specifically his music works incredibly well at establishing a very kind of almost downtrodden or quiet mood throughout the series. The series has a lot of I wouldn't quite say downtime, but very slow moments where it's
Yeah.
very quiet and still.
Yeah. So just a little bit of context for those of you who maybe don't know. You Flats mentioned this earlier. The Heike story is based on the epic poem from the I think the 12th or the 13th century, which is based on
Yeah.
the real life Heike Genji War, which was one of the biggest civil wars in Japanese history. So
Yeah.
while it is true that this is a modern telling, and in fact it's actually based on I think a mid 2010s modernist take on that poem. This is based on an actual historical event. So part of the reason why I think that matters is one of the complaints that will obviously get levied against any kind of historical show, regardless of where it's coming from, is this accurate? And here, I actually am going to say this: even if it fudges some of the details, like for instance, Biwa was not real. She was a completely original character. I don't care that it took liberties. I don't care that the
Yeah.
story took liberties.
Yeah. I don't even. I mean, I obviously can't really speak to that. I've not read the original story, but
Mm.
from what I've heard from a few people who have read it, it's quite faithful, to be honest, and a quite faithful condensed retelling of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Obviously, when you do an adaptation of a story like this, you're going to have to do some modifications. Otherwise, to a modern day viewer, some of this is just not going to read well. You
yeah,
can't completely adapt one for one. I mean, you can obviously, but
you can try, but then
it's
yeah, this
yeah,
would be a 150 episode anime as opposed to 11.
yeah, it's very dense work.
Yeah, but what they managed to pack into those 11 episodes was so rich and so the word I use to describe the series to people is cinematic. Like this feels like it moves on the scale of a movie with each episode.
I think what's most impressive about the show in that regard is how they do battle scenes.
Oh God,
It
yes.
really does. It condenses a lot of battle scenes into about 5 minute chunks, and what I think is most impressive about it is the scale and immensity.
Mhm.
Combined with the Biwa playing a Biwa
Mhm.
and kind of renditions of the battles from the epic, I really think it does lend an incredible amount of heart to really not a lot of time, and I
Absolutely.
think that's quite impressive. Yeah,
Because the one impression that I got, and maybe your impression differs, is that while it is true that the Heike War is in and of itself the backdrop for the entire story, this is really not about the war itself. Because if it was, then I feel like it would have been a lot more dry as a piece of entertainment.
I
Either
mean,
that, or would have meant the question of why am I watching this when I could watch a documentary
yeah.
instead?
I mean, just like many works, like it's one of the things you hear levied against Neon Genesis Evangelion all the time is it's not really about the robots.
Hmm.
The war is used as a means to an end.
Absolutely.
In this case, it's used to tell a lot of different themes that I think Yamada and Yoshida and all other creative people involved wanted to tell within the story.
Hmm.
I think the war is utilized to talk about masculinity, femininity, general norms of the time, greed, and I think the way it does all of that is relatively masterful.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just because it's one of the very first ideas that's introduced, just the idea of fate and destiny as well. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, because in the very first episode, and by the way, I put a disclaimer at the beginning of this, so we can talk about spoilers. It's not a yeah. So
very good.
don't feel like you have to restrain yourself in this case. I put the warning in the beginning. If people are still watching, then then
That's their loss.
yeah, then they're agreeing. Then they're agreeing to listen to two guys from across the ocean to talk about this stuff.
Yeah,
But I mean, it's told in the very first episode by Biwa that the Heike clan, or the Taira, if you prefer to call it that, is going
yeah.
to fall. She has foreseen this with her heterochromatic eye. Which, by the way, anytime there's a character with with heterochromia, I'm instantly there. Like I don't know
That's
what
something that gets you into
I
the
don't
story.
I don't know what it is. Like I really like the idea of characters having two different colored eyes. I can't help it. Like
It's definitely distinctive. I'll give you that.
yeah, like Oto from Wonder Egg Priority. I likewise liked Oto for that partially for that very same reason.
I think aesthetically it's very unique, and I think that lends a lot into the character of Biwa of allowing you to. Quite, she has a very distinctive character design. That really is one of the most helpful parts of it.
Absolutely.
I want to circle back to what you were saying though. what is really interesting about the show is, in a classical way, in like a lot of classical stories, it foretells what is going to happen in advance.
Absolutely.
And so you are aware that this entire story is going to lead to the Heike's fall. You're aware that it's going to lead to several characters' deaths. We see it firsthand before they happen.
Absolutely.
And it telegraphs all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really cool. I always love when stories use this device because it then forces the author to have to make the story exciting enough so that when we get to that point, it still packs a punch.
Yeah, because when you divulge what happens in your story, that's such a huge narrative gamble. Because in a sense, you've already taken away one particular aspect of surprise. I mean, when it's done poorly, when this kind of telegraphing is done poorly, the natural question that you're going to ask is, well, okay, if I know what's going to happen, then why on earth am I going to still keep watching? And the reason why is because, and this is what the show ultimately I think is in a way really about, is that it's less about the overall war as it is about the individual players in it, and how every single one of them, regardless of how old they are, what family they're in, what their job is, what their livelihood is, they're all impacted by the immensity of this war.
Of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm
go
not
ahead,
sure
please.
I'm not sure quite what I'd call the final message of Heike Monogatari. I really think that it kind of leaves you to your own devices to kind of ponder that.
Mm-hmm.
It of course talks about the immensity of the war, but the focus it places on so many individual characters. I mean, obviously you're correct with everything that happens to every character and every sort of thematic purpose that each character leads with is directly drawn from the war.
Yeah.
But as a main thing to take away, I think that really is dependent upon who watches this show, whether it's they resonate with Tokuko, or if they resonate with Kiyomori or any of the other characters, if they resonate with Goramori, Shigemori. A lot of these characters in this show have their own separate issues that are given a light for at least an episode usually.
Absolutely. And I mean and like I said before, that pertains to everybody, regardless of who they are, especially Tokuko, who by far is one of the most fascinating characters in this show, because in a way, she's in the least amount of control of everything that happens to her. I
really like what they do with Tokuko's story.
Oh,
I think Tokuko,
yes.
Tokuko narratively is probably the most, I'm not going to say straightforward, but it's a very biting narrative that they do with Tokuko. They establish very quickly that she has very little input to her own life. I really like how the show utilizes Tokuko as a means to kind of explore a lack of feminine agency, especially within that time when under a male-dominated society.
Yeah, and also just simply the fact that, her entire station for living at that point is to simply birth an heir, and then what?
Yeah.
And then what are you supposed to do?
I mean, I also do like the extremes that they take, kind of the introduction to Tokuko too, where even towards the end of the story, one of the most fascinating things about the end of the show to me was that I think a lot of people took something different from the end of the show than I did, which is when Biwa saves Tokuko's life. A lot of people saw it as a more positive thing, as something of Biwa protecting her and telling her that under everything she's allowed to live.
Yeah.
I didn't see it quite in that way at all. I saw this as almost a condemnation of just generalized society, because it gets to a point that even Biwa takes the ownership away from Tokuko. Tokuko truly wants to be able to die an honorable death and a beautiful death like other people, and she's not even allowed that.
Or even if you want to say it's not necessarily an honorable death, she's just so unbelievably grief-stricken that she does not see any kind of possible way to have her life have any sense of real meaning anymore. I mean, she just watched her aunt take her son to his death by drowning him. And so then, like you said, she herself tries to end her own life, and Biwa says, I think, what's the line that she said? It's like, it's not your time to die yet, or something like that.
Yeah. I feel like it's such a purposely extreme line.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And
purposefully, sorry, not purposeless.
It's totally fine. Which then, of course, brings about the whole entire ending scene where it's after Tokuko has become a nun, and then Biwa is playing and musing about the impertinence of all things and how everything that we cling to will eventually wither. It's just amazing how depending on how you want to look at it, Tokuko is the character who has either who has in fact lost the most because of the death of her child, at the complete loss of her power because the Taira is just gone completely. Or you could argue that in a way she has gained the most because she has let all of that go through becoming a nun and praying and sort of having a kind of second life. Now, that will obviously, like you said, depend on what it is that you're looking for in this finale. But I think the fact that both interpretations are there really is just a mark of how well this character was handled.
Yeah, I think to a point also, I'm not even sure towards the end that she cared about her power being lost.
Yeah, I don't think she really cared about that either.
I mean, clearly from the scene where she threatens to become a nun earlier in the show, she clearly, the only power she relishes is to be able to control her own fate.
Absolutely. I've said absolutely a lot in this recording already, and we're only like X number of episodes in. I really hope that's not going to become a catchphrase that I say throughout the course of this. So if
you can market it if it gets big enough.
If anybody wants to, in the comments, wants to have like a running count or something like that, by all means, go right ahead. I'll be the first to laugh at it. But yeah, the exercising of her agency, the little bit of it that she can do, actually carries with it a lot of power. I mean, the fact that, like, I think it's like episode 3 or something when she says, like, then I'll just become a nun then. And then everyone's like, whoa, like, we can talk about this. You don't have to do that. Okay, let's just drop it. You don't have to do that.
What's specifically great about the scene is she threatens that before her own father, Kiyomori, who, throughout the entire show up to his death, is very much the most powerful person.
And he
dominates every conversation that he's in. He doesn't feel any qualms about essentially putting the emperor under house arrest. Man wants what he wants, and he gets what he gets. He always gets what he wants.
Yeah, I mean that's
in that one moment, Tokuko completely takes it away from him.
Yeah, and just as a sign of just how much he's just simply used to getting his way. I mean, it's one thing when you're in charge of the most powerful clan in the entire country, but it's another thing when the exercising of that power is so actively used to make everybody else's lives miserable. I mean, he doesn't have any real qualms about sending his own troops to either kill people or to do other things if it means even holding on to his power for just a fraction of a second longer.
I mean, the show starts with Biwa's father getting murdered.
Yes, it does.
At the hands of the Heike themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just fascinating to show how even from the beginning, even before really everything starts to go wrong for the Heike, they've already been abusing their powers.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't know. And maybe in that, it suggests that maybe if they had learned to stop and had maybe learned to control themselves a bit more, they could have even gotten away with that. Yeah. But trouble breeds trouble, as they say.
And it sort of also hints at that sort of one philosophical idea of, if power can only work as long as it is actually exercised. Now, the natural problem with that is what you just said, in the sense that the Heike have become so consumed with their own power that it was sort of, in a way, the inevitable outcome that the Genji and all the other families and clans would eventually rise up against them, which eventually happened, and then the Heike just died out completely by the time of the final battle.
What's interesting about the Heike's demise as well is that the show does show concretely how it happens. It's not just they got a bit too big for the britches and they fell apart. They show a very clear progression.
Yeah, is there music playing in the background of where you are?
Sorry, I am in a Spanish storm and they like to play very loud reggaeton.
That's okay. Well, you know what? Hey, it gives the viewer something to also listen to in the background.
It gives some atmosphere.
Yeah, it gives them some atmosphere. I mean, okay, maybe it would be better if we had a biwa instrument playing in the background, but but you know what? Just bring on the reggae. I say bring it on.
Yeah, but anyways, what I was saying with what I was saying with the demise of the Heike is, I think one moment concretely that shows their abuses of power and really kind of their blindness to the conflict is when they burn the Buddhist temple.
Oh, absolutely. And then 2 episodes later, they face the immediate retribution of that with the monks themselves.
Not even 2 episodes. It seems almost immediately that they face it.
Yeah, I mean,
for the rest of the show as well, the Buddhist monks plague them. and are one of the biggest stopping blocks for them at achieving really anything.
I just bring up the 2 episodes later thing, just because that's when I think the Heike sent like some envoys or something, and then the monks just killed them, and put them on spikes, just cut off their heads and put them on spikes, which is such a, to use a very modern expression for such an antiquated story, such a baller move. like. Like, I'm sorry, that's just really cool. I just couldn't help but think of Game of Thrones in that instance. What can I say?
Of course.
Yeah, what can I say? But but at the same time, it perfectly expresses just the sheer extent to which the Heike's power has just so infested every facet. I mean, even like you said, because Biwa's father gets killed, and he's blind. So it's not even like he is in any position whatsoever where he could pose some kind of a threat to the Heike or anything like that. And yet the fact is that those members of the clan considered him such an offense that they just fucking killed him. I mean, they just killed him right in front of his daughter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing where he slightly speaks up, like barely speaks up even, and that results in his death.
Mm-hmm.
I do have to wonder really what this show wants us to believe about really the natural state of politics. And I mean, obviously it lends itself to the corrupting nature of power. I think that's an obvious one.
Yeah.
But really, I don't think anybody on the political realm in the show is a good person. The Genji certainly aren't. What's most interesting to me is that the head of the Genji within the show is portrayed as a doofus.
Yeah. That is true.
He is portrayed as someone who barely knows what he's doing, who basically has to be talked through his ear to be able to get through anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the show is suggesting that it's like the Heike falling necessarily is good for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that while the Heike dying out might solve a few problems, that doesn't automatically mean that everything is all, sunshine and rainbows. I mean, part of the problem is that now the country itself, and granted we don't really see that much of this because the story is at that point essentially over, it doesn't change the fact that you've basically unseated the most powerful clan in the entire country. Like, it's then sort of just ask the question, so what happens now?
I mean, here's the other question.
Yeah.
To the average peasant within Japan, has anything really changed?
That I don't know.
We've been seeing a lot of power playing. We always see things from within the show from the eyes of the powerful. Mm-hmm. Everyone who's fighting to maintain their power and everything like that. We occasionally see glimpses of the poorer classes when we see Biwa going through the streets or when we hear about the capital being moved. But other than that, it just seems like this is incidental.
Yeah. Now, obviously, because you and I don't know that much about Japan's cultural history, especially during this period of time, maybe there is a much more unsung implication about what the capital hopping and what all of the actual political gamesmanship and murder actually does entail. This is unfortunately one of the problems with when you're trying to watch an anime that honestly really does feel like it is primarily suited towards a Japanese as opposed to a more globalized audience, which I think is also part of the reason why not so many, because I think that's an exaggeration, but perhaps why some people have such a problem with Heike Monogatari as a series. I mean, it's the first anime in a long time, at least that I can think of, that is not really trying to sort of reach over the ocean to cultivate a Western audience.
I mean, I have two things to say. First of all, I can't exactly speak to the unsung implications. I feel like the implications of the capital hopping are pretty obvious with the show. Mm. It's very much a dick measuring contest.
Yeah.
They moved the capital to this smaller city, and the only thing that it has to offer is this giant new absurd temple that they spent so much money on.
Yeah, they spent a lot of money on that fucking temple,
and it does nothing to help them. It is just them exhibiting their domination, which a lot of cultures have done over time just to really exert their power.
Yeah, of course.
To the tune of really audience response, I think audience response to the show, at least from what I've seen, has been frustrating. It seems like a lot of people, to be blunt, haven't quite gotten the show. A lot of I've seen a
Mhm.
lot of people point it out as a failing that they don't completely understand the show, as if a show is and should be tailored specifically just so that they understand it automatically.
Like, it's one of those things where one of my absolute least favorite things, and even though I do actually kind of believe it to a certain extent,
Yeah,
is when people say you don't get Evangelion, and like, and I do, and while I do think maybe that's a bit of a dick move, I also do sort of understand why people say it, and also just because Evangelion is one of my favorite just things in all of entertainment, not just anime. But I
yeah,
there's a part of me that honestly thinks that the same could sort of apply here, because people have been lamenting the supposed decline of anime for years. So here comes a show that is really trying to do something completely different, that's really making an effort to stand apart from so much other stuff. Like, it's not just another isekai, it's not just a high school harem rom-com, it's not just some, insert other genre that's been beaten into the ground here. And yet when this show, which is really, I think, and even if I didn't know that Yamada or Ushio or whatnot were involved in this, I would still feel the same way. It really feels like it's trying to reach a higher kind of artistic standard, and yet,
yeah.
and yet, and yet, there seems to be this almost kind of resistance to it. Now, you're obviously not required to like Heike. I mean, if you don't like Heike, that's perfectly
I mean,
fine.
it all goes down to personal taste, of course, but
Yeah, but at the same time, like, when people have said that it's presented, it's got such a rough, like, you can't really penetrate it because it's so, which, yes, I said the word penetrate, haha, we what are we, 5? um as I chuckle too. I have the heart of a 5-year-old, what can I say? But, like, oh, it's presented sort of imperceptibly, it's hard to get into, and I'm just like, this is one of the most visually and acoustically interesting things that anime has produced in 2021.
I mean, I don't think the show's the most accessible. Like, I'll give
Yeah,
people that.
yeah, absolutely.
I've heard people complain that the show just name drops and that's all it does, and I do feel like to an extent people just aren't watching.
Yeah,
It is a clinical case of people, first of all, only looking at plot
yeah,
and really thinking that if they don't understand the plot 100%, then that means that it's the show's failing. And
yeah.
really, with a show like that, unless you've read Heike, unless you're integrated with Japanese literature, you're probably not going to get 100% of this, but you can try to understand it to the best of your interpretation.
Yeah, because here's the thing. I didn't even know that the Heike Genji War was even a thing until this was announced. And I say that, like, with full admission. Like, I say that completely confessing I did not know what this conflict was.
Yeah.
And also, I'm more than willing to bet that a lot of anime fans also probably didn't know that either. Uh, and I will also admit that there are a lot of names to keep track of, especially, Kuremori, Koremori, Shigemori, Kiyomori. Like, there's a lot of similar sounding names, so sometimes keeping track of
Yeah.
who's who, or who's related to who, or why does this matter with this person and what did that person do, like, it can be a lot to keep track of. But at the same time, I never felt like I never came away with the sense that that was somehow the show's fault.
Yeah. I mean, I also do have to say, with all of the character names, doesn't matter. Do you have to know every character?
Like, yeah, I mean,
I think as long as you're able to follow the general plot, you should be able to follow everything relatively well.
mhm.
Like, you might not be able to get everything 100%, but I feel like in a lot of media that's the case. It takes a while. With some shows it takes a while to understand characters. It's
Mhm.
just that in Heike, a lot of the time they will introduce characters and a couple episodes later they'll be dead.
Yeah, like,
But I don't really
yeah,
find a problem in that.
I don't really find a problem with that either, especially considering that the show itself only lasts through the period of about 5 years. I think is how long the actual real
I
life
have no
lore
idea.
lasted, something
It
like
could
that.
range visually. It could range anywhere from 5 to 20 for me. I have no real clue.
Mhm. But even during the course of that 5 years, and even if you don't necessarily have the ability to keep track of everybody, it doesn't change it, to me at least. It doesn't change the fact that, especially with either these battles or just with Biwa playing and recounting all of
Yeah.
those songs as she's watching either in physically, as in the case of the last episode, or perceptually with her extra eye, just all of this
Yeah.
absolutely tragic shit unfold one after another. Like
Yeah.
you just feel the immensity of this entire conflict. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't necessarily know what this means, but I know it matters. Like I know it's important.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a fair stance to have. Really,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. I am terrible with names.
Mm.
But I recognize, just based on watching the show over and over again, you're watching every episode. I recognize generally the important characters. I recognize their top moments. I focused on them, and then they were gone. And I
Yeah.
was able to really enjoy the show enveloped like that.
Now here's a question. Do you actually think that this is an easier show to binge watch than it is to wait week to week?
Probably. I think most of the complaints I've seen have been week to week watchers. I have to think that watching the show all at once, where you're going to be bombarded with the characters' names over and over again, and you're
Mhm.
going to see them all progress very quickly. I have to think that would be easier to follow.
Yeah, and it's sort of interesting in the sense that this is, I admit, not a perfect comparison. It kind of reminds me of Akira Kurosawa's film Ran, or Ran,
Yeah.
if you prefer that pronunciation, which is again about a war. And for those of you curious, it's basically a cross between King Lear and classic samurai epic, which also just even
Yeah.
even just by concept alone just sounds cool as shit. But the idea of just this very big conflict that involves all of this familial infighting and internal politicking and fighting, and it's just one large scale film epic. It's long and it's tiring, but again, you because of the fact you are in fact enduring it, you're watching it for one sitting, you naturally, I think, just manage to keep the details in your head a little bit more. There were a few times watching
Yeah.
Heike when I did have to go back and just rewatch scenes from other episodes because I had to remember, oh right, that's this person, or oh yeah, that happened because of like the
Yeah.
event or the thing with the temple, which we had talked about earlier. So in that sense, I do agree with you that the quote unquote barrier for entry for Heike is a little bit bigger than other anime. But
Yeah.
I mean, for me, getting over the barrier to entry was so damn worth it. Mm,
I would definitely agree.
yeah.
I think if you go into the show with an open mind, you should be able to have a fun time.
hmm And it
I,
also,
I
yeah. It
yeah.
also, I
Sorry,
think,
continue.
no, it's okay. It also depends, I think, on what do you, on what you sort of predict the story to be. If you expect it to be a full-fledged account of the Heike War, you're going to be disappointed because it doesn't go over every battle, it doesn't go over every conflict. It goes over the important ones, especially in the final 2 or 3 episodes. But it does
Hmm.
not. It is not a documentary. Let me put it that way. It is not a
Yeah.
documentary, and even then, I feel like an 8 hour documentary would be nowhere close to enough to talk about this conflict. Um, but for as a piece as a story about the individual people who are strung along by fate or by the lack of agency that they possess, or just the other forces that are conspiring to either keep the war going or to just shift the power balance in some tiny insignificant ways, even if in tiny insignificant ways, it's
Hmm.
nothing short of compelling because it's a character story. It's not a war story, it's a character story.
I want to go on to a slightly different topic.
Please go ahead.
I think one of my favorite things about the show is it leans very hard into the fact that it's part myth, part reality.
Mhm.
I really enjoy how the show does it. It
Mhm.
flirts with mysticism all of the time. Of course, there's the existence of Biwa, who possesses two eyes that allow her to see both the past, or both the future and the dead.
Yeah.
But there's also just like it very casually will at times just throw spirits in.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of my favorite examples of that is when Kiyomori has. I'm not going to say a hallucination, but a dream. It's a dream sequence
Mhm.
where he sees death. He sees death itself,
Yeah.
or at least what I interpret to be death. Of course, it could be. I'm not sure the exact Japanese god,
Mhm.
but it leans very hard into it. Of course, there's other instances of this in the show. I
Yeah,
think the other most interesting one is when they have Shigemori basically essentially prays for the health of the clan, even if it means his own life, and we see the life taken out of him,
absolutely.
and then by the end of the episode, he's dead.
As in, like, that was like, oh, you want to offer that up? Well, all right, cash that check, buddy. But I mean, especially when dealing with stories that take place in antiquity, uh, or sort of, if you want to call it this, like a bygone era, if you will. I mean,
Yeah,
one should never underestimate the importance of when characters in that time period or in that setting talk about religion or fate or destiny or the supernatural, because it is, in a sense, a honest glimpse into what that world meant for these people, what those philosophical ideas meant for those people. So
of course. Yeah,
the fact that Yamada directed this series like almost like it was treating the Heike War itself as a mythological event worked so well in its favor because like you just mentioned, it allowed them to incorporate elements like that without them feeling forced or without them feeling like contrivances.
I mean, I think what I like about it is it presents the Heike myth as with because the Heike myth is only one of many medieval Japanese myths that are like this.
Mm-hmm.
It presents it in all of its glory. It could have presented this as a very, as you said, dry war story, but that's not how the presentation of most myths are.
Yeah.
Of course, they're partially based in reality, but they slightly jazz it up. They slightly add some more entertaining qualities. They slightly add some mysticism and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And Heike engages in that in spades, and I love it for that.
Mm-hmm. And it is important to remember that even hundreds and hundreds of years ago, these stories were told as entertainment. It just so happens that in the year 2021, the manner by which we have entertainment is different than it was, say, in the 1400s. I mean, unless, Da Vinci somehow penciled in his sketchbook like a precursor to the television or something like that. But so and then that's also part of the reason why. I mean, if you want to offer the complaint like from one particular person that I saw of, I don't understand why they felt the need to make this an anime. It's like, well, the reason why they're making it an anime is because the original poem is in and of itself, it may not necessarily be entertainment in the sense that we might say refer to a show like Rent a Girlfriend or something, but it is meant to be a story to be told. It's meant to be entertainment in that regard. Hence why, I mean, the fact that hence the reason even why Biwa is spending any time whatsoever playing the Biwa and telling about these characters who maybe their name would have been lost if somebody didn't recount it in the first
Yeah.
place.
I mean, I think the thing that I would observe with that specific comment, I have to wonder why this is the one they draw problems with. With media, we draw inspiration from myths and fairy tales and other such stories all the time.
Absolutely.
That's how some of the biggest media conglomerates have even gotten started here.
When you wish upon a star.
I find that I do find that a particularly bizarre criticism to level.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, if that was the case, then these people must really have a problem even just with the Brothers Grimm, because I mean, the version of the fairy tales for the Brothers Grimm are not the original versions of those stories. I mean,
Yeah,
they may be a different take on them, but it's not they're not the originals. Um, and as far as that's concerned, I actually, in a way, I hope that we see more of this kind of stuff. Not necessarily more stuff about like old Japanese wars, or even necessarily from, now we're talking about 900 some odd years ago, somewhere in that
yeah,
realm. I really do, in a way, hope that we see more of an emphasis on sort of a kind of mythologized take on events in history that really, really mattered. Because I feel like the creative potential, both visually and acoustically, that you can pull off with that would be so phenomenal. Especially when your show is presented with an aesthetic as though it were Japanese screen paintings.
yeah. First of all, I will take as many historical dramas as I can get. I eat the stuff up.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
I don't say that to be condescending. Like, good for you. I mean, like, no, good for you, man.
I think the aesthetic of the show is stunning. The ukiyo-e influence is obvious. The coloration of this show is impeccable.
Oh, it was so gorgeous, especially for me at least when it goes into the stark color contrast with when Biwa is playing and recounting and the hair just becomes chalk white. And you just hear those strings being plucked in the background. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think a thing I've seen very under talked about with the show is the animation itself.
Yeah.
Which the show is very well animated.
Yeah, I mean,
I think some of its hallmarks are the way it does nature. I think that's incredible. Some of the last episodes are specific. I mean, a lot of the show deals with characters having to confront weather. Yeah. And specifically in the last episode, they have to confront a storm. Yeah. And the way they animate that is incredible.
God, like even just with the way that the ship is moving as the tide is changing.
Oh, yeah, they get all of the undulations. They capture that.
I mean, they spared no expense whatsoever on movement in this show.
Yeah, I'm impressed it held up the entire time. It's just this show doesn't falter.
It really does not. It's amazing how it does not do that.
I think along with that, my favorite episode by far, animation-wise, is episode 9.
Episode 9 is just a wonderful episode. Like, it just as 23 minutes of entertainment, it is very good. And I know that you're chuckling because when I first saw this episode, I thought that it was one of the worst ones. And you were about to come through my screen and kill me.
I was not pleased with your take on this episode originally.
Well, and then I thought to myself, you know what, like, maybe I just need to see it again. Like, was there something about it that just didn't work? And I think what happened was, one thing that happened was, I did actually have a really, really shitty day. But I know that really doesn't, that doesn't necessarily cast a magic excuse. But
that can affect viewing habits more than people would like to admit.
And no, absolutely. And I also say that with full knowledge that, like, it did. But also, I think the reason why I liked it so much more the second time was I placed a little bit too much emphasis on the one thing in the episode that I didn't like, and so it discolored.
Which was?
I wasn't necessarily crazy about how they handled Biwa reuniting with her mother after all that time. But then the second time that I saw it, and I just remembered that this is just a part of Biwa's traveling and just gathering more stories to tell throughout the course of this war. That for me made it land so much more effectively. Just also because it's an emotional reunion between kid and mom. I mean, am I really that much of a gutless dick that I would have to poo-poo that?
I mean, obviously the scene is incredibly thematically important for Biwa. It is the end of her initial arc, which for 9 episodes had been, or for I guess the last 5 or 6 episodes had been trying to find her mother.
Yeah.
I was not the biggest fan of that scene. Of the episode, I think that might have been, even though I liked it, it's just in comparison to the rest of the episode, I liked it significantly less.
And even then, the reason why we like it significantly less is just because everything else in the episode is so good.
Oh, the episode's phenomenal.
Like, can we just talk about that whole entire sequence when they're on the water and the stuff with the boats and the instruments and us? Oh God! Like, I felt myself, even the first time, I just felt myself slump in my chair when he stepped off the boat and into the water.
When the show did that in complete silence, I was so happy.
Which
a lot of other shows I don't think have the self-restraint to just leave a moment in quiet.
I've talked about this with other people before, Aaron especially, but one of my absolute favorite things that a television show can do is to just shut the fuck up and to be quiet.
I'm not gonna quite put it that way, but I get what you mean.
No, yeah, okay, and maybe I was being a little bit overzealous. I'll admit that. But it just also goes to show that the grandness, not in the sense of how amazing it was, but just how tragic it was. The grandness of the event didn't need to have, characters wailing. It didn't need to have all of this extra added acoustic or visual baggage. it just allowed the moment to happen, and the reactions obviously are panicked, but at the same time, it feels like, in a way, it feels like you're kind of looking through a window, as it were. Like there
To
is,
be fair,
yeah,
to be completely fair though, also the as he falls into the water, it is immediately juxtaposed with Biwa screaming his name.
definitely, yes,
I just think the moment that most impresses me is the single moment after that where it shows the gentle ripples of that his body sent into the water, and
yeah,
it hangs onto that, and it just allows you to kind of just really feel the utter eerie silence
hmm
that just commenced in that moment before reality sets in.
yeah, just
And
it's
I
yeah.
really enjoyed how they did that.
It just gives you a moment to think to yourself, just that just happened, and especially considering that this was a character who, and it's funny because 2 episodes or 3 episodes before, he's lamenting the fact that his days of having
Yeah.
fun and playing music are essentially over. So in a way, he's already at that point lamenting the fact that his life has ended. Uh,
Yeah.
and now with everything just crumbling all around, and him just also being scared of what could possibly come next, it just dr- dramaturgically
Yeah.
anyway makes perfect sense that he not only did what he did, but also that it just also showed just the sheer emptiness that he felt by not having the show clog that moment with all of this extra unneeded weight. Like you said, Biwa screaming was all that it needed, and just the moment where
Yeah.
they clutched the flute um, on the
I
boat
mean,
too.
something I will say about all of the young male characters of the show is they are all soft boys.
Yeah.
I love how within the show it shows so many times these people are unprepared for conflict.
hmm
It presents that to them. Conflict is very, very earnestly shown as the thing that ruins them. These are people that all they want to do is play games, eat well,
hmm
really kind of ignore the realities of their situation and why they are where they are.
Yeah.
I think the only person who tries to really step up but also fails doing that is Koromori.
Yeah. And we know what happened to him at the end of, I think, episode 10, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Koromori is a tragic character.
Very.
I
Yeah.
love what they do with him.
hmm
Koromori is a character that is meant to peacefully preside, maybe peacefully govern, and then he's thrust with his father's death into kind of the worst position you can be for someone inexperienced and really unaccustomed to war.
hmm
Every time something goes wrong for him, which is any time he governs a battle,
Yeah.
it destroys him.
Yeah. It destroys him, which by extension just makes the Heike even weaker. And then you also have just the encroaching
Yeah.
existential threat of just the sheer dishonor that carries as an implication, which makes perfect sense that he spends the 10th episode essentially running away, which then, in a sense, culminates with him
Yeah.
running away and with the finality of him drowning himself too. I mean,
I
yeah.
do find it interesting how the latter half of the show characterizes a lot of like almost every character death really as them drowning.
hmm
It's like towards the end of the show, other than when one of the characters is stabbed to death,
Oh yeah.
everyone dies by jumping into the water and just allowing themselves to sink.
At least among all the quote unquote important characters. We obviously see
Yeah,
characters die on the battlefield, but the idea that the idea that the death waiting for them is not a sword, it is not an arrow, it is not an execution. It is rather just it is in a way the gentleness of the water that's what kills them.
yeah.
There's just dude, I love this series.
Oh, I agree. I think the
Yeah.
series is impressive,
Oh,
to say the
it's
least.
very impressive, and I'm just not going to be forgetting it anytime soon. You and I could stay here for like 7 more hours and talk about it, as far as I'm
Oh,
concerned.
there are so many different areas to get into this show. You could write a
Mhm.
paper on this.
You probably could. I would be surprised if there's some opportunistic young animation scholar out there who's probably doing that very same thing.
I respect them,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely,
whoever they are.
absolutely. And the I just like how one of the very first things that you said when we started recording was like how do you even start talking about this show? Like,
Yeah.
even now, after all this time, and I'm not saying that we have to stop here. I'm good for like the rest of my day. Is just here we are in the thick of it. Like, where do you go from here?
Yeah.
I mean, and here, like, I don't. Obviously, we still have all of December to go as far as the 2021 year of anime. Um, I don't necessarily know, because I still need to think about it a little bit. I don't necessarily know if Heike is my anime of the year, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's on my short list of like the top 3. Like
Oh,
this, yeah,
I'm not gonna hesitate. This show is my anime of the year. I don't
yeah,
think a show comes close to how this show made me feel.
yeah. It awoke something in you.
You want to put it that way? Sure.
But just I just th- I just looked forward to watching this every
Oh,
every
every week
Wednesday.
this
Yeah,
was a joy to watch.
this really was. I have nothing else. I already had such incredible respect for Yamada and Ushio and whatnot,
Yeah.
and all this did was increase it even more. And maybe this is just me, but and because you had mentioned this a little bit beforehand, but I actually do think that the music got better as the show went on, and I think part of the reason for that is because
Yeah.
now that we really were thrust into the entire conflict, and we were also now being introduced to Biwa's ability to recount and play and record. I think it just gave Ushio a lot more to work with as far as musical material goes, because beforehand a lot of it was primarily ambient sound or ambient music, but when the time came to actually sit down and record tracks, whether it be for Biwa or for battles itself, you really could just feel much more shimmering in the music in general.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I definitely think as the show goes on, at least as much as I'm aware of music, sometimes the best music for me fades into the scene, and
Hmm.
so I can't quite speak of it well. As the show goes on, I definitely feel like the music really enhances a lot of the tension
Hmm.
that's already relatively palpable in the scene,
Yeah, the way that
and
I
and it,
yeah,
and, and it makes it more and more omnipresent.
the way that I would describe it is that the music it got to the point where it felt as natural as the backgrounds.
Yeah, I would agree.
Hmm. And especially in the even just in the final scene when it's Tokiko at the temple after she's become a nun, and just in the final little bits of sung by Biwa, which by the way, that was the perfect voice for Biwa singing. It was the right mix of both incredibly resolute while also having that slight earthiness to it that made it feel not refined with a capital R, but made it feel like it was of the earth, if that makes any sense.
I mean, there's a definite maturity to the voice that I think really enhances it.
Hmm.
I love. Whenever Biwa begins her songs, it's just like it has such a booming domination over the scene. It takes the scene over whatever scene it plays itself in. You will be in a scene where it'll show people running into battle, and then Biwa will come in,
Hmm.
and it will just. uh, What I do like about it is there's a foreboding element to it constantly.
Hmm.
You'll see people running in, and then Biwa will start, and you'll be like, "Oh, they're all gonna die."
Yeah. And I think part of the reason for that is because it does not overplay both the voice and
Yeah.
the biwa itself. It gives each one time to do its own thing and before switching
Oh,
over
yeah,
to the next one,
definitely.
and then we get a little like those little tiny bits of action that color the
Yeah.
scene even more. And so then when biwa gets to the next verse, it does a very interesting job of balancing between the narrative quality of biwa's playing versus what we're actually seeing transpire. And to go back to episode 9, it was perfect in that final sword battle in the water.
I That scene left me shell shocked.
That scene awoke something in me.
I The direction in that scene, I think the episode director of this, Ryohei Takashita, already was impressive, and then that scene happened. The action is so delicate and well balanced.
Hmm.
I love the way they do lighting. I love the waves gently bouncing back and forth.
I love the way that it faked you out. Like, it thought that, oh, like, maybe he did get it's Atsumori, I think, that it makes you fake you out, like, you think he actually did get a solid, clean hit on the other guy.
Yeah.
But then, no, it turns out that he was played for the fool, and then he gets tackled into the water, and then he's got the katana right above his head. I'm just thinking to myself, oh my god, this is so beautiful. To quote Willy Wonka, the suspense is terrible. I hope it'll last.
Also, oh my god, the sword movement in this sequence.
Oh.
It is so smooth. It does magnificent smearing. I love smearing in animation.
Mm-hmm.
It does it really well. It has such a tight choreography to it that your eyes track it continuously in a beautiful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just the scene is the perfect way to punctuate an already incredible episode,
and it's the perfect juxtaposition to the quiet death of the I just had his name and then I lost it. The person who drowned himself earlier in the episode.
Yeah.
What's his name? Shigemori. Yeah. Just dude. What? I feel like nothing.
The way that they were able to do silence in that scene as well, though, was also equally impressive.
Mm-hmm. And punctuated then afterwards by the fact that Atsumori is screaming at him, like, just take my head. Like, just do it. You're right there. And it's almost like, in a way, you'd be doing me a favor.
There's an ethereal quality to the scene where he's begging for his own death. The warrior realizes just quite how young he is.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the depravity of this entire war really sets in for a brief moment.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the young people who really, really suffered in the course of this whole conflict. Not just with Biwa and her father dying, but also just Tokuko with her being sold off. The fact that the Emperor dies when he's only 6. The fact that all of these, the fact that these, and that Shigemori, who himself is not that old when he dies in episode 4, or the fact that, you know, the other characters say, you know, like, our innocent days are over. I mean, these are children who were forced to grow up way too quickly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as is the tone of a lot of war stories,
mm-hmm.
It has to happen ultimately. A war as all-encompassing as this is going to take away childhood innocence.
It really is. But that's also a part of what makes it so compelling as a story, is because, especially because, and this, I don't necessarily have a grand sweeping, like, definitive reason for why that is, but because I think we live in such a cynical time as far as a lot of things are concerned, to see the loss of innocence, especially from people who really did not deserve it, is just something that is so crestfallen, is a truly crestfallen thing to witness. And in a way, in its own weird way, I actually find Heike Monogatari to be a rather timely story in that regard. I mean, there are so many angles that you can, as you've clearly been listening to, there are clearly so many angles that you can take away from this story. And and the best part is, I feel like you and I haven't even really scratched the surface of it yet. Like, I feel like this is one of those stories where the more we think about it, the more that we're just going to love it, like, all the same. I mean, that's at least how I see things.
Oh, definitely. I feel like just the more I think about the show, the more I really look back into it again, the more I analyze the directing, the more I kind of drool over the animation.
Oh, yeah, I'm right there with you, buddy. I'm right there with you.
It's just, the show gets better. Every kind of look through. It really is just a tightly done production.
Mm-hmm. It's almost as though, as the war itself escalates, the sheer quality of the anime escalates with it, because it knows that it has to follow that sense, the same sense of scale. Otherwise, it's just going to fall apart on itself. I mean, this is a show that, and there isn't even necessarily a singular quality that you can use to ascribe to it, but this is a show that just also feels so self-aware. Like, it really...
I guess, yeah.
Like, and I don't necessarily... Like I said, there's not really a singular quality you can ascribe to that, but it's a story where you just feel like all the people involved knew how important this was, and knew that they wanted to make it the absolute best that they could be. Now, maybe part of the reason why I say that is because I happen to be an incredible fan of the people who were involved. That's entirely possible. But
Of course, yeah.
all I know is that but when this ended a few weeks ago, I just thought to myself, I have to talk about this show. I have to. I mean, and that's not including the fact that you and I had been exchanging comments back and forth about it while it was airing. So there is that
Oh,
too.
of course, yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. No, this was a good show.
What else is there to say?
I I don't know. I is there anything else that you feel the need to talk about or address, or does that mean that we
I mean,
should?
I I
Yeah.
I have like a Santa style list of things to check off, but
And checking it twice.
really, I think we got most of the big ones that I wanted to really talk about.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's something tiny and incidental, you're more than welcome to bring it up here. I mean, you got the floor.
Yeah. Um.
It's either that or you got to focus on moving out of your dorm.
I mean, I got to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
I just think in general, the show really through talking about people's lack of agency in the world, I really do think that humanizes the show quite a bit.
Mm,
It watching a show of people that are so lost all the time, who try to fight that through sheer recklessness or bravery or threats or really putting themselves up to danger if they feel it will maybe bring them to a more certain place. It is a quality that really resonates with me, and that's one of the things I enjoyed the most about this show.
hmm I mean, this is loss of innocence, loss of just trying to find some kind of, just try to find some kind of way to survive so that way you can see tomorrow, whether it be through appeasing Kiyomori or just trying to make sure you don't die on the battlefield. I mean,
Yeah.
there was that entire sequence where because all of those birds took off near the water, that they thought that they were getting jumped, and so because they interpreted that as a surprise attack, they retreated, and
Yeah.
and just like the fact that I mean this is also just a story of just scared characters, and being scared I think is just such a fundamental just aspect of not just war stories in general, but also just simply being a person, that it manages to pull that off in a way that is so poetic and so grand and cinematic that I wanted this to last even just one more episode.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
I did not want this anime
yeah.
to end.
I mean, the show really does show that war is hell. It that
Mm,
that is a thing I genuinely appreciated about it. With the
mm,
discussion of fear, almost every time it shows war, it presents it as inhumane,
mhm.
disgusting,
Yeah.
depraved. You see people getting run over. You see people getting quick. People who have been talking big the entire show get shot in the neck and die.
Mhm. Or
It,
people who
it's
yeah, or people who realize that because they don't have like because maybe they even acknowledge that they're fighting a losing battle. In the case of the last episode, they decide to just charge into Valhalla and just go down swinging as opposed to going down with a whimper. Or the fact that,
yeah,
going back to the fact that when the ant on the royal boat, asks, what's the state of the battle, and the advisor really doesn't want to say the fact that they're just gonna fucking lose.
yeah.
Oh man. This is the show that just keeps on giving.
I completely agree. It for an 11 episode show, it has a lot more to offer than I think some two core shows that I've seen recently, to be honest. And that I think is incredible.
Yeah, it's in that sense it's compact and it's sweet, and it shows that even though seasonal, like one core anime might have perhaps not necessarily the most sterling reputation as far as delivering quality, it shows that you can absolutely still deliver good quality, and you don't even necessarily need to have. And this is the other thing that we've also sort of been hinting at, but I do want to sort of bring it back again to some kind of a conclusion, which is
Yeah.
that you don't necessarily need to have a truly unique message to make the show itself truly unique. Like, war is hell, loss of innocence. Like, this is nothing new that Heike is doing. But because it was presented in this almost mythological, picturesque kind of fashion, it felt, as a viewer, just different. And even just by virtue of that alone, it was worth giving a chance initially.
Ultimately, a show has a very limited amount of messages to truly offer. Almost everything that can be concretely given as a theme has already been done before. We're always constantly dealing with having to try to make something that's, on a lot of ways, stale fresh. Yeah. And Heike does that.
In many ways, I actually sort of consider Heike to be the, not in terms of quality, but I find it in a way to sort of be the anti-Sonny Boy, because Sonny Boy, which was also sort of like a single director being able to have basically full creative control over his entire show. That show basically operated under the idea of, we're going to try to cover literally as much ideological and philosophical ground as we possibly can in the 12 episodes. Heike feels like it took 2 or 3 and really emphasized and really heightened them to the absolute peak that they could bring them, at least in the context of the Heike War that it was telling.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, and that, I'm not saying that makes the show by default better. I'm not saying that it makes it worse. I'm just saying that in Heike's case, it managed to work incredibly well.
It shows that I think I can put it even more succinctly. As long as you know what you want to do, you can do it well.
Yeah. In this case, it handled less is more effectively.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, so, let's see. Was there anything else on your Santa checklist that you wanted to take care of there?
Not for now. I think I have most of them checked off the naughty and nice list.
Alrighty then. So I suppose then we should start wrapping things up here.
Yeah, I think that's in order.
All right. So thank you to everybody who was listening. If you do want to follow Mr. Flats, I will link both his Annie list and I think you said there was at least one other social media link that you wanted to give me
I'm
or something?
thinking about it. I don't really offer much insight on the other one we're thinking about. Definitely follow me on Annie list. I occasionally will offer insight on shows I like. I'll also just put up the copious amounts of manga and anime that I'm reading and watching.
Absolutely. So I will make sure that link goes in the video's description. I will say, just from having interacted with you before, one thing that you can recommend to everybody is to watch Black Rock Shooter, which you got me to watch.
Of course.
Yeah, and I liked it. Not to the extent that you did, but I did like it.
The Black Rock Shooter OVA is a work of art.
It is
beyond which I could describe simply.
Yeah, it is very good. And so I guess then I'll make sure that gets in the video's description. And on behalf of Mr. Flats, I have been ZNote of ZNote-Talku, and we bid you all a good night, or good afternoon, or good day, or whenever the hell you listen to this.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.